I'm going to read these questions, and we're going to talk about describe the rack in a power rack and pinion steering system. Actually, even you could use the term to describe it. It's in the handout for this. Incidentally, if you guys need to get access to it, and this stuff's going to be on the final at the end. There's a folder on that computer right there that says steering and suspension. I'm going to tell you, if you got a jump drive, you can put that stuff on your jump drive. You know what I'm saying? But right now, we're just going to go over that. This right here is a steering rack off of a Nissan. And this right here is the steering column where it hooks up. And you notice you got power, this is return, that's pressure. And this right here, whenever you turn that, this actually directs pressure to one side of this piston or the other, depending on which way you get your wheel turned. And you might notice you got a rack right here, so you can have steering. And even whenever you don't have power, you still got steering, see, because you got a direct hookup. There's actually a rack on the end of this. If you ever see oil in these boots, then that means that something's leaking up in here. There's never supposed to be any oil in these boots. You may see grease and everything. You never should see any oil, right? And this one here came off a Nissan. And these boots are pretty important. Now, obviously, these right here on the end are your tie rod ends. Now, steering and suspension test 2. All right, so you're going to, whenever you're changing out this inner tie rod end, and they get sloppy, you got to screw that off the end of that rack. And somebody worked with me last semester changing out the inner tie rod ends on a Ford Taurus. And those darn things, we actually made a wrench to turn them with, that would go on here and grab, because they got wrench flats on it. And they absolutely would. It was super, super, super hard to turn. I took a wrench, bent it, made it into a, mold tool, used a big pry bar. The wrench fit good and tight. We couldn't hardly turn those things at all. I mean, we really worked hard trying to move things, and they would turn, but it was real hard to turn them. And so I said, well, we got to heat these up a little bit with a torch. And what it amounted to was, and I don't know, I didn't know this, they had Loctite in there or something. And so all I did was I heated them a little bit with a torch. And after I heated them with a torch, I didn't heat them hot enough to make it rack hot and mess up the seals in here. But I heated them inner tie rod ends with the torch. And after I did that, you can screw them out with your finger. It just loosened them up that much, So always think about the fact that they may have some Loctite in there. Some of them have little roll pins driven down through there, sort of foul up so they won't screw themselves on. Huh? Yeah, they got a little roll pin in there. But there is a steering and suspension worksheet where you're supposed to replace these inner and outer tie rod ends and stuff. And this is usually one that I let you do that on, but you got to do it in the car. And if the worksheet is so easy that you can just put it in a vise and screw it off and screw it back on, you haven't learned a whole lot, basically. And there's also a worksheet where you're supposed to remove the rack and pinion and put it back on there. And I was having people doing that on the Ranger. Yeah, they're not the rack and pinion. Y'all were working on different kind of steering. You were working on the old recirculating ball gearbox kind of steering. Okay, so if you describe the rack in a power steering rack and pinion system, you get your pen ready? The rack's a round steel bar with teeth machined into one side. And the pinion has got teeth that match that. The pinion's just got a few teeth. And the rack's got a lot of teeth. Got it? So the rack is a round steel bar with teeth machined into one side. And the pinion is a little rotating gear with teeth that match the teeth in the rack. That's what rack and pinion's all about. That's what that word's all about. And what you're seeing in this thing right here is you're seeing the teeth that are machined into that. And when you turn that, if I got a pair of pliers and turn this, you'd see this bar going back and forth. Hey, young lady. Leave your car over here. When you come back, we'll do your work order.
Well, I gotta go do an errand. When you leave it right here, I'm off the top.
Yeah, you can do that. And, hey, I tell you what, go in there where Kayla is, and Kayla will set you up for the work order and fill it out and bring it here and I'll sign it, and you can just run it straight up to Stacy. Okay? All right. But, I noticed while she was here yesterday, nobody here was in a hurry to leave. You notice that? Usually these guys pull the doors down and they hit the door running. And really. Grab your steering and suspension test too there.
You didn't learn how to park.
Yep. Okay. All right, let's let's watch this now. All right, everybody ready? You getting it there? Okay. Now, that was the rack surround steel bar with teeth machine on one side, and the part that hooks to your steering column is your pinion, and the pinion is actually, that pinion will have teeth around it that interact with a larger part. What do you call the small gear in a rear axle assembly? The small gear in a rear axle assembly is called what? A pinion. Bingo. It's a little gear, and it actually meshes with a larger gear, and you turn the little one, and it gives you a mechanical advantage, so you make stuff go. All right, so here in the suspension test 2 is where we are, Tyler. List 5 components of the power rack and pinion shaft and control valve assembly. Wow. You got a stub shaft, you got a torsion bar, you got a valve body, you got a pinion shaft, and you got a valve spool. And you need to go over that handout. Look at that stuff. Stub shaft, torsion bar, valve body, pinion shaft, and valve spool. Can you remember those? Stub shaft, torsion bar, valve body, pinion shaft, and valve spool. Say that with me. Stub shaft, torsion bar, valve body, pinion shaft, and valve spool. Valve spool. Torsion bar, valve body. What are the last two? Can you say rubber baby buggy bumpers? Can you say rubber baby buggy bumpers? Rubber baby bumpers. Rubber baby buggy bumpers. Rubber baby buggy bumpers. Can you say that? What about you, Archie? Can you say that? Rubber baby buggy bumpers. Stub shaft, torsion bar, valve body, pinion shaft, and valve spool. Stub shaft, torsion bar, valve body, pinion shaft, and valve spool. And the spool valve basically works sort of like spool valve in automatic transmission, you know. Whenever it moves back and forth, it directs fluid. All right. What do the bellows boots seal at each end of the rack? Right here, these bellows boots is what we're talking about here. The bellows boots at each end of the rack, what do they seal? What are they there for? Why are they even necessary? Cover, stop dirt from getting into the... Exactly, you gotta stop dirt and dust. What did I tell you before, when Tyler wasn't here then? You ever see oil in here? You got a leaking rack. You should never see oil in here. Now, sometimes you'll see that these boots are busted, and that means they need to be replaced, but they're not going to cause any immediate problem. He's got a busted boot on his Zeke. But that will not cause any kind of a problem other than the fact that eventually dirt will get in there. But if you got oil and stuff in there, you got a problem. All right. Okay. So they actually, and I'll tell you something else you have too, and you might notice this sometimes. You're going to have some of your some of them will have a little tube running from one boot to the other. Why do they do that? You ever think about that? In other words, who in the world ran off with my black marker? Isn't it? Somebody's got to get the smackdown laid on them, because I got a black marker missing here. All right. You'll have the rack, and you'll have your little bellows boots. Of course, they go out to your tire line either. Shut up. All right. So right here, I got a tube going from one to the other. It's just a hollow tube. Why in the world would they put a tube there? Huh? Exactly. You don't want to swell the boot up because of air. I mean, the air is going to be transferred back and forth. But if you move this one here, it's going to be pushing air somewhere, and the boot's going to swell up if it ain't got a way to. Now, a lot of the boots, like the ones on here, will have a little vent. You know, that will vent the air, will keep dirt from coming in, but it's, it's a little flapper valve. All right, so, okay, so when what's the purpose of balancing tube? And that's what I was just talking about. The purpose of the balancing tube between the two bellows boots is when one bellows is compressed during a turn, the air trapped inside is moved through the tube to the opposite bellows. So you're just moving air back and forth. Everybody got that? There it is. This is an ugly pen. This is the one that, this is a girl pen. I think we're going to sign my name with a girl pen. August 2011. And this is a 2000 Volkswagen Beetle. Check tube. That's all it is.
That come in fast.
Yeah, he actually had it this morning. It's in that box laying up on top of the, It's just a rubber tube again, you'll see it. It'll look different when you put it on. Okay. Now then, here's another one. You guys better know this answer. Somebody needs to know this answer off the top of their head. What's the difference between pull and wander? Somebody said, I have some, of course, I will tell you this, the customer is not gonna be able to describe,
Pull is when you let go of the wheel and it immediately goes to the right.
okay?
Wander is like being in the road of the road, where the road's wore down and it slowly just.
Well, well, wander is actually when it goes first one way and then the other. You know what I mean? Like something's loose under there moving around, and it may go just wherever. You know what I mean? Pull is when it's always going the same way, yeah. And wander is whenever it's kind of doing this all over the place. You know, and it's not going any one particular direction, it's just going kind of here and there. So that's the difference basically between pull and wander. But the tendency of the wheel to always drift right or left when the steering wheel is straight ahead is pull. And one time there was some guys out here that were working on some kind of a big Bronco or a pickup truck, I can't remember what it was. And they were just getting into the steering and suspension thing, and they had learned to do steering, they had learned to do alignment, and they did an alignment on this truck because it was pulling really bad. It had some big old fat commando tires on it, all that kind of stuff. And so this thing was pulling really bad. It was pulling really bad. Leave out what you're talking about, over. It was pulling really bad, and so I said, well, and so they came back and said, well, all the alignment angles are right on this thing, it's still pulling really bad. Well, see, we were just getting them into the learning process on this. And I said, take the tires, just, of course, you know, there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can swap the tires on the front from left to right. But I said, take the tire, on the right side where it's pulling. I said, rotate the tire from front to back. Leave the other side alone. And see if that makes any difference at all in the way it drives. So they went down the road, and it had been pulling to the right real bad, and heck, now it's pulling to the left. And all they did was change the tires around. So they'd already set all the alignment angles. And I said, okay. Of course, to start with, they were blowing me off. This guy was 40 years old. He was an ex-military, know-it-all kind of a guy. No, he couldn't imagine how tires would do that because they all look like they're going to roll about the well. So I said, now swap the ones on the other side. When they swapped ones on the other side, they wasn't pulling at all. The ones that didn't want to roll were on the back now. If they're on the front, they're going to, you know, of course, they can be bad enough on the back.
Yeah, my car was doing that when you told me that. Sometimes I changed it and stuff.
Yeah, you swap the tires around. So it's just, you know, it's not rocket science. You know, you don't have to get all upset about it. You don't have to go mad and everything. All right, so wander is whenever it just kind of goes, you might have seen this before, you know, it's kind of going, how many of you have a shopping cart that wanders, like it goes any kind of way? Some of them pull, some of them wander. Lubricant in a manual rack and pinion steering gears needs to be changed every 60,000 miles. Correct? Wrong? Just leave it alone. Be aight. I will tell you this though. There are service procedures for changing the fluid, doing flushing the power steering systems on power steering equipped vehicles. And you know how you do it? Anybody know how you flush a power steering system? It has nothing to do with the toilet. What you're going to do is you're going to take your return line. You know, you got a pressure line, and you got a return line. The return line brings the fluid back to the reservoir, right? Okay, so you're going to take your return line, and you're going to point it at a container that's kind of big, you know, like a gallon or two or whatever. And you're going to turn the wheels back and forth while your buddy is continually adding fluid into the hood. And all that stuff that's returning is going to return from that return line into the bucket. Now, so in some cases, you'll have to cap off the return port where you unplug the line from the reservoir. When that happens, see, you're actually putting new fluid in there replacing the old fluid. And all the fluid throughout the whole system will be clean. Now, there is not, as far as I've ever seen, and I could be wrong, somebody may correct me on this eventually, but I haven't seen a service interval for power steering fluid replacement in the book. I've never seen one in the book. But there is a procedure, manufacturer published procedure, GM published procedure for flushing it and all that. Now, how many of you have ever drove a vehicle and, you know, you could hear the power steering go, you know, all that? That's usually means it's low on fluid, right? Not always. Sometimes the pump's bad. Sometimes you may think you have a bad power steering pump and you can have a bad idler. And I'll tell you what, replacing the power steering pump's a heck of a lot of trouble just to find out that your noise was somewhere else. That's a pain. And then it's been there. And this one guy, this boy that was working at he's one of my graduates, and he's working at a shop over in Ozark. And he called me up and he said, I have got a really noisy And I said, I was sworn it was a power steering pump. And he said, I put a power steering pump on this thing. It sounds just like it did before I put the pump on there. And he said, now the air in it or nothing. I don't even see any foaming up in the reservoir. And I said, I tell you what's wrong with that thing. I said, I bet the belt is shiny and it's got little, of course, he already checked the idler and the tensioner and all that. I bet the belt's one of them shiny ones that's got little fluted cuts across it. It looks kind of polished. And he said, yeah, they just put a new belt on it. And then they noticed it making this noise. I said, well, put a Gates belt on there that's kind of fuzzy, but it's, you know what I'm saying? It's got the little fuzzy ridges on it instead of having the polished ones. And put it on there real quiet. That's all he needed was a belt. And I saw that here in the service bay. This guy, James Pound, had come in here and he had a Chevrolet pickup truck. I put some on my website about it. He come in here and he had replaced the alternator. He replaced the tensioner. He replaced the idler. You know, what happened was he had to put an alternator on it because the alternator went bad. It was making a racket. So he put a brand new alternator on it. Well, fall up there, I'm just going to replace the belt. So he replaced the belt. Started this noise, driving him crazy. That's one of the reasons he went to replace the alternator. And so he took the alternator off, and they went and tested it, and said, well, we'll give you another alternator, just on general principle. Noise is just the same. Replace the tensioner, it's $50 for that. Still hearing the same noise. He's driving him up the wall. So, yeah, can I come over there? He's one of the graduates, too, but for some reason, this is beating him up. So I screwed the fan off. You know, the fan can be screwed off with that one, and you can still have a pulley there. Cranked it up with no fan on. That way you don't lose fingers, and the wind is not blowing, messing up your, you know what I'm saying? So he cranks it up without the fan on it. I get my stethoscope, and I'm listening for this noise. And right there where that belt is hitting one of the pulleys, and where it's going into the grooves, I'm hearing it really loud right there. And switched it off, pulled it off, shiny belt, you know, I'm not going to tell you what the brand name was, but when I wrote about this in Motor Age, that company called Motor Age, hey, why are you doing that, man? You're messing up our sales on our belts. I said, well, you know, you call the kettle what color it is, you know. I mean, if the belt's shiny and causing trouble, you need to do something different. So anyway, we put a Gates belt on it, and it was just as quiet as it could be. He didn't need any of the other stuff he could put on it.
What's the kind of belts we're gonna get?
Yeah. Well, I've got one I can show you out here I'll show you what kind it is. I've actually got pictures of it on the website and everything else. I didn't call the name of the belt. But if you ever look at one and you see it's made like that, now that company has got away from making those belts now. Like they got a different design now because they were having so many problems. But they didn't appreciate me telling everybody about that. List 4 possible ways power steering. List 4 possible power steering pump leak points. Power steering pump.
Those lines we use.
Huh?
Line, power steering line.
Yeah, that's actually a line.
Leak right now, on one line.
Remember I told you the story about the Lexus SC300. Okay, you know they got these crooked pipes and they got hoses. Anytime you got pipes hooked up, you got crooked pipes hooked up, you're going to have flexible hoses because the engine has to torque and there's like a movement that's got to take place. And if you got a metal there, it's going to bend and bend and bend, and eventually it's going to break. Sometimes it does that anyway. But the fact is, this one here was leaking from the rubber. So we pulled it. This is a story I'm going to tell you again because I think you may have heard it before. I'm going to tell you again just so you can burn it in. We pulled the power steering line off, sent it to Sam. Okay, Sam has got the ability to cut these lines off, and he uses some ferrule fittings and some special hose, and he can fix the power steering hose. He just uses the crooked parts of the line, and he, makes it just like it was, except he puts a ferrule. So then he finds out that he can't fix these because the stupid ferrules won't fit. So why are we doing this to start with? Why didn't we just order a power steering line? Somebody remember that? Somebody heard it? $450. Okay, I had to sand it down to where it was an 11 millimeter line. He had 10 millimeter ferrules. And first Sam started using a grinder to try to bring those lines down to where the ferrules would fit. And so what he had was, when he started trying to use the grinder, he had lines, the line where the ferrule went on it, he had ground it off, and if you look at the end of it, it was egg-shaped. And an egg-shaped line's not going to work with a ferrule because it won't bite, The ferrule's got to be tight so it won't leak. And so what I did was I crocus cloth the end of that line. With crocus cloth and brought it down to 10 millimeters so the ferrules would fit. And we built like a line and fixed it up and all that stuff. But I used one at a Lexus salvage yard, which he found up close to Montgomery, was for $150 for a used hose, which is kind of silly to get that much for something as simple as that. Anyway, he was still going after that. They can leak between the pump and the housing, right? If it's got a housing, it's got a big O-ring on it. They can leak between the shaft and seal. I used to reseal power steering pumps. You get a kit in those days, you get a kit for $3 or $4. You put a seal in it. Huh? Yeah, you know where the shaft is spinning, can leak from there. Outlet hose fitting. You know the one that we were pulling the pulley off of out here on the bench? That one was full of fluid. It was on 2001 Pontiac, Montana. It was full of fluid. It was spinning real good. Wasn't making no noise. But she had no power steering, none. So if you check the power steering level, and it's full of power steering fluid. What I found out later was the flow control valve, which is in the outlet behind the pressure line coming out of the pump, was stuck at the bottom of the bore for some reason. Hey, Dan.
Is he on the
phone now? He just, no? He just was? I'll, 4930680, tell him to order it. Yeah, that's 0680, 4930680, and tell him to, go ahead and get me that switch. All right. So, all right, now we got that it, shaft and seal, pump and housing, hose fitting, return hose connection, and leak through the pump housing. How can it leak through the pump housing?
Great housing.
Or what? Something fairly common. That, no, through the housing. Through the housing. I bought one time, and I'm going to tell this story for a reason. You guys have all worked under a sink where you got a trap, right? And right here at the bottom of the sink, you got a thing that the trap hooks to, and this will be inside your sink and all, and coming down here, and you got your little... Well, I put one of these on that I only got from Lowe's. This real fine thread stuff, wouldn't, it's been there since 1971. I had to get that off of there. So I get my metal cutting blade on my skill saw. Cut that sucker off under there.
This is my last interruption.
Huh?
She said that I think the school should come back for my field rec because they won't let me pay till they will take off my field rec responsibility. She said that,
Well, you want to take it off your bill there?
well, that's what we were paying, like, it's going to all of my chicken and stuff, it comes in and they got to send them out. And she said she on my Thursday or something like that. And that,
Well, come back when you get the money.
well, I mean, like, I got it, but she don't want me to overdraw my chicken account. Like,
No,
you can understand how you can do it.
Yeah, don't overdraw your checking account. I mean, like I say, your Volkswagen is not sure they're gonna die if we wait till Thursday. See what I'm saying?
Right.
So do what works for you.
Well, that's just what I think it's in, I just want to let you know, because I'm both something we sit there, like, it's black.
Sure, no problem. No problem. All right. Okay. All right, now, right here, we got a leak. This thing kept leaking, and kept leaking, and kept leaking, and I redid the fittings, and I kept putting it back together, and I let water run out there, and it would leak and leak and leak, and it leaked, and I couldn't get it to stop leaking. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I was sick of this crap. Why is this thing leaking? I got a real bright light, and you know what I found out? This thing was cast material, and there was a porous casting, a little hole in it, where it was leaking outside of it. And what did I do? I got some Lexol, and I smeared it on there. I wasn't pulling that thing back off and carrying it back to Lowe's. It only cost $10 anyway. You know what I'm saying? I mean, because it was late at night and all that nonsense. So anyway, this is the other thing, a porous casting through the pump housing. Sometimes if something's cast iron or cast aluminum or whatever, you're going to see a porous casting. That's what they call it. P-O-R-O-U-S-C-A-S-T-I-N-G, period. See, got to make sure you get your punctuation right, too. Technician A says a power steering return line will leak primarily when the steering wheel is turned. And that's how, if you've got a power steering leak, one of the first things you want to do is put on your safety glasses, poke your head over there and say, okay, Joe, turn the wheel. And you're going to see fluid squirting everywhere. Whoa, whoa, I see it's coming from here. If it's a pressure leak. But the return line, does it have pressure on it? No. It does not, does it? Technician B says the return, and that's why the pressure line is, that's why the return line is, it's got a hose clamp on it instead of a fitting. Technician B says the return line is usually a metal line with a crimped fittings at both ends. Return line? Neither one of those guys is right. They're both a couple of yo-yos. Using your own common sense, right one of the most important steps of finding the source of any oil leak. What do you think? Using your own common sense. I'm telling you, this car out here has got a power steering leak. What do we usually do, guys?
Look for it, look for it.
Now, what we usually do is we take brake parts cleaner, we wash that sucker down, and we clean it off. Or, what you can do, if you want to be cocky, is you can paint that sucker really good with Dr. Scholl's foot powder. Make everything just as white as snow. And where that oil's coming from, you're going to see that black. Right there. See? Man, Dr. Scholl's foot powder is a miracle stuff. I want to find wind noise on the right-hand door on my Jeep, I paint that seal with Dr. Scholl's foot powder. And I close the door, and then I open it back up. And where it didn't wipe the Dr. Scholl's foot powder off, that's where my leak is, where my air leak is. Got it? All right. But anyway, that's what you do. Your own common sense, wash the thing off first. Steam it, wash it with brake parts cleaner. The brake part cleaner is a little more expensive. But, okay. Okay, and I've already answered this, the question number 10. Leakage through the gear housing indicates what? Porous casting, or a hole in the housing. You got that?
And spell it one more time.
Pourous.